The time is now 10 o'clock and this hearing session is open. This hearing session is dealing with transport and it's in relation to the examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. My name is Roshan Barrett. And I'm a planning inspector, I'm a chartered town planner, and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out this independent examination. We haven't got a particularly full room, but I do know we've got somebody here who hasn't been to previous sessions, so I will set out a few housekeeping rules. Or housekeeping matters. The first one is, please can you turn all electronic devices to silent. Please use your microphones because we're being recorded. We're not expecting a fire alarm today, so if it does sound, please can you leave by the doors behind you and follow the green signs and congregate in Abbey Gardens. Please avoid in adjournment, please avoid walking in the central space just because there are trip hazards. And when we leave to adjourn, if you are charging laptops, etc., please can you just pull the lead in so it's not a trip hazard to other people. Toilet facilities are on the second floor. That's all I have there. Agenda has been published. That's on the website. I'll expect you to be familiar with that, and indeed my guidance notes, matters, issues and questions. And because you've put both participants, they have put representations in, I know that you are familiar with those. So the purpose of the examination is to assess whether the plan passes the 4 tests of soundness, and those are the tests that are in paragraph 35 of the NPPF. And it's helpful to me if you refer to those when you're making your comments to me. So the first one is that the plan is positively prepared, providing a strategy which as a minimum seeks to meet the area's objectively assessed needs and is informed by agreements with other authorities so that unmet need from neighbouring areas is accommodated. Justified, sorry, where it's, if I've started that, I have to finish, where it's practical to do so and is consistent with achieving sustainable development. Justified, an appropriate strategy, taking into account reasonable alternatives based on proportionate evidence, effective, deliverable over the plan period, and consistent with national policy, enabling the delivery of sustainable development in accordance with the policies in the framework and other statements of national planning policy. Okay, any other matters that we need to address before we get on to the main business of today, which is dealing with the transport section of the plan and the SDA? Anything that we need to raise? I don't think so. Okay. Let's move on then. So the STA, ST15, that underpins your suite of policies that deal with sustainable transport and active travel. And I'm just going to turn that up. So we've got 4 policies in that section. I just want to touch on the STA. And I've only got a few questions on that, so I don't want to spend too much time. And they touch on 1, the use of a vision-led approach, 2, the use of the sub-regional transport model, and 3, in relation to the findings. So the strategic transport assessment uses a vision-led approach as opposed to previously, in the 2023 NPPF, it talks about to predict and provide, and that's the way that historically we've always done it. You refer to Circular 122, which talks about a vision-led approach to these matters, and indeed you refer in your evidence, and we all know that that's now been embodied in the updated and the extant NPPF. So can you please based on what national policy says, and of course I'm assessing this plan against the 2023 MPPF. Can you justify the approach that the SDA has taken, please? Whoever is appropriate to talk to this matter.
Yeah, I can take one.
Thank you.
Hannah Roper. I'm representing Hampshire Planning and Transport. We are a consultancy of Hampshire County Council, but we are not representing the Highway Authority around the table today. So
you are not?
No, we're not the Highway Authority. We are the consultant to Winchester City.
But you're representing sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So we are Hampshire Planning and Transport,
yes,
which is a consultancy.
Yes.
At Hampshire County Council. So although the STA has been prepared in collaboration with the highway authorities, National Highways and Hampshire as a highway authority, we are not representing the highway authority today.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's one of these spin-off things from local authorities which operates effectively as a private sector consultancy for these purposes. So what you're hearing from is effectively our consultants on this. The Highways Authority have not appeared as such. They may have the word Hampshire in the title, but that's for these purposes, the extent they're linked with Hampshire County Council.
Okay.
In terms of the Highway Authority.
Thank you for that clarification. Please continue.
Okay, so the methodology of the STA is built around a sort of hybrid approach. So recognising that the MPPF at the time still recommended to go down a predict and provide route, but acknowledging that the future is much around vision-led planning. So we used the sub-regional transport model, the SRTM, subcontracted, run by Sistra, and we worked in collaboration with both highway authorities to do the standard approach, which is to model the spatial impact of the spatial plan, its distribution, and the quantum of development on the network. That resulted in a number of junctions showing that they would be either have a significant or severe delay. Now, in the old approach would be to address that to accommodate the development, but moving away from that predict and provide, we set a vision within the STA, which essentially is backed up by the LTP4, which rebalances the focus on moving away from providing for private car trips and actually then prioritising walking, cycling, public transport, freight over individual private vehicle trips. So to that end, we found 21 junctions across the network of the district that showed that there would be a significant or severe delay. And we narrowed those down in line with LTP4 to look at those in more detail that either carried a bus service or posed a road safety issue. So in collaboration again with both highway authorities, we had a workshop which then reduced that list of 21 down to 3.
Sorry, you said that you Homer, that you've actually gone on to my next question, but no, please carry on. So when you had those 21 junctions, you sieve them, sieve approach, those that had a bus service or
a road safety issue.
Issue. Thank you.
So in accepting that, in line with LTP4, a moderate amount of delay on the network would be accepted where it only affected, private vehicle trips. So that's where this sifting process came about through a workshop, and we reduced that number down to 3 junctions that could or would need to be mitigated in typical or traditional highway engineering approaches, principally to make sure that the buses on that network were not delayed. And that's very key because the junctions that were assessed carry the Park and Ride bus from South Winchester up through Badger Farm and onto the city centre. Those junctions were the M3 Junction 11 Hockley link, where the Park and Ride bus comes out. The next roundabout, Northwood, which is the St Cross roundabout, and then further up into Badger Farm, the Meadow Way, Sainsbury's roundabout. So all of those have an engineering solution in terms of providing additional capacity or stacking room to allow that bus route to not be adversely affected. So the M3 Junction 11 roundabout, there was some capacity improvements, shifting the roundabout slightly to the west. There's some cross roundabout applied, a signalisation approach, and then the Meadow Way was some additional flare lengths on the approach to the roundabout and the exit to the roundabout.
Okay, thank you. You've strayed into my line of questioning, but that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So can I just rewind a bit? So my first question was, how do you justify moving away from predict and provide?
Mm-hmm.
Now, and just you said it at the beginning, but can I just clarify that?
Well, the justification is around what's now embedded in L2P4, because essentially there's a road user utility framework within that sets the priority in which you should seek to encourage sustainable travel. So it very much is in line with that approach.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is the use of the sub-regional transport model.
Mm-hmm.
And what you say there are two scenarios. The do minimum scenario, which is without any mitigation. And then you've got the do something scenario, which is with mitigation. But neither of those scenarios, and indeed the assessment that you do, can take into account all those active travel, sustainable travel initiatives. Tell me, therefore, is it actually, I mean, well, you say, is it an appropriate methodology to use? That's the question.
I think it is an appropriate methodology based on the fact that there's no specific guidance currently in how to do a transport assessment that is purely vision-led. So that's why it's this kind of hybrid approach. And I think it's also something we used for the Fareham Borough Council STA, which was also which was found sound in 2023. So it is I guess our best way of producing something that isn't just focusing on the old traditional predict and provide, and moving forward with something that does then reflect what we want to see and how we want our transport outcomes to be for the future.
Okay, so what's the implication of not? So you haven't been able to all those, and we've heard about them in all your site allocations and underpins these transport policies and spatial strategy, etc. How are those taken into account in the assessment that you've made, or are they not?
Sorry, is that the policies or the?
Sorry, all the active travel initiatives that run through the plan.
So essentially, the active travel initiatives come from the various strategies that are in place. So, for example, the Winchester Movement Strategy that would be implemented. You know, it's not modelled because clearly you can't, in traditional highway modelling, model those
because
initiatives.
There's no certainty about what. No, I get that.
Exactly.
I get that,
and then looking at measures that are proposed within the LC WIPs and also the bus service improvement plan. They are the mechanisms, the delivery mechanisms of how the active travel would be promoted above the providing capacity for general traffic.
Okay, now I want to make a comment here, and I want your view on it, and then I will open it up to Deborah. So, is it fair to say that the assessment that you have carried out, because it hasn't been able to take into account all your active travel initiatives, is a cautious assessment?
Yes, yes. Essentially, based on the highway element of the assessment, yes, it's a worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario.
Absolutely. Okay. So it's cautious in that sense, and clearly the delivering the strategies as part of that sort of active modes and public transport, the sustainable side of things, would need to be clearly monitored and managed through the development process.
Okay, thank you. Now, please keep that comment that I made in mind, and I'll be happy to take comments on that. With the council, I just want to come on to my third point, which is about findings. So you already strayed into this. Yeah. So under the do nothing, you identified 3 junctions, and you've given us some detail on that, so I won't repeat that. And then under the do something, 21, and then you use the civic approach, and you've explained what you've done there. So Hampshire County Council agreed on the do something scenario, those 21 junctions. They agreed that there would not be an unacceptable impact on delay. The caveat was that, and we did touch on this when we were dealing with Bushfield, subject to the outcome of Bush Camp modelling. Yeah. Now, can you comment on that, please?
Well, at the time of the STA, we modelled the land use scenario that we had on the table at the time for Bushfield Camp. So obviously that would need to be readdressed if any other proposal comes forward.
Okay. So, I mean, I heard what the council said. There's a statement of common ground from Hampshire County Council. Can I have a view from you? Is this an objection to the plan from Hampshire County Council, or are you unable to?
I can't comment on the Highway Authority, but no, I believe they did.
Mr. Fox, yeah. I don't want to go.
Yeah, so just to be clear, Hampshire, on the statutory arm, to avoid confusion, they've not objected to the plan, and obviously they've not objected to any of the policies in the transport topic, nor have obviously National Highways. And obviously we've got a statement of common ground with National Highways.
Okay, so what Hampshire County Council have done, they've commented on that policy, but as we heard when we were in the session, they commented on that policy, and they have put assess the criteria.
Yes.
And okay, I understand that. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, if I may, obviously in terms of the findings, not to jump the gun, whatever, but obviously the findings from the STA directly inform the policies in the plan, obviously the site allocations, and you would see that obviously particularly the site allocations in Winchester Town, where basically we are not going down the road of basically wanting highway improvements to pick up obviously what you've just heard. We are basically saying obviously it's restricted to car parking for emergency and disabled vehicles only. So we are actually implementing the sustainable measures that came out of the strategic transport assessment. So just to be clear about that.
Thank you for that.
And I also, sorry, Valerie Ballerin again as well from Hampshire Planning and Transport. Just on that point, just worth mentioning that the STA models the overall impact of the local plan and is not site specific. So we can't draw direct conclusions in terms of the findings from one site or another. I mean, obviously, it's clear that the large sites, such as Bushfield and Surgeon Moore Barracks, we can quantify some of their impacts because they will have had their own zone being modelled, but the overall output or conclusions of the STA is for the entire local plan allocations, not site specific, results. And that's why obviously, as you mentioned, and the impact of accessible travels or measures, sustainable measures, that needs to be done on a side-by-side basis through the planning application process.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Sorry, I wasn't stopping you from talking. I just wanted to write a note. Yeah. Thank you very much. Just one final question. So what you come up with is a monitor and manage regime. Just explain that to me, please.
So monitor and manage, obviously, again, it's an emerging concept.
Yeah.
We are recommending, obviously, that again through the planning process, each development will have its own travel plan. What's in the past, they weren't really monitored it to a great deal, and there was obviously some default clauses in the Section 106 agreements, etc. In this instance, now every site, because of the nature of the sites, the travel plans will be slightly different depending on what they are proposing in terms of the mix of uses, for instance, and other factors that actually affect demand, because this is very much now about managing demand rather and restricting car-based demand, rather than mitigating the impact of highway capacity. And that will be done through the travel plans on the side-by-side basis through the planning process. Yeah. There is also monitoring with the LTP4, sorry, on the wider. The LTP4 at the moment doesn't have some targets, but that is in the works, I understand. And they obviously, as a county-wide, there will be some monitoring targets that the LTP4 will be measured against.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fox?
Thank you. Just before we leave this kind of subject, I think it's quite important, obviously, the point my colleagues made about obviously what this STA doing. It's obviously looking at obviously the impact of the local plan allocations, but also obviously how it's done. So it's obviously divided the kind of the district up into zones, and with Bushfield Camp, just to make entirely clear, we gave that a dedicated zone of itself, because basically we knew that we wanted to actually pick it up in the STA, the impact of Bushfield Camp. Now that's quite, because we did that for a specific reason, because we wanted to make sure that obviously that we did fully assess that impact of that site, because otherwise it could have fallen in, you know, one or two zones or whatever, but we wanted to make sure that it had a zone by itself so we can assess that. But I don't know what my colleagues want to say any more about that.
So just to say that, yes, we will be able to, well, the developers of Bushfield will be able to use the SRTM to isolate the specific impact, and also request Sistra, who are running and managing the SRTM, to do any changes to reflect their proposals rather than the master plan that we've included as part of the STA. But yeah, that wasn't.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I just want to deal, we haven't got on to T1 yet. I just want to deal with the STA, please. Mr. Gag.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm struggling with definitions, really. I think what we heard in terms of what the STA recommends, good old predict and provide. What the STA decides is there won't be much impact on the network, the road network, apart from in South Winchester, where there will be considerable changes needed. That's the result of a predict and provide approach, and it's nothing to do with identifying a vision. We have in the local plan, and we also have in the local transport plan, a lot of words about aspiration. You know, it would be nice if more people were to walk. We really hope that there will be a 10% reduction in car use in the local transport assessment. But we do not have in the local plan a vision. We do not have in the local plan even an attempt to say what the mode share will be for people living in new developments or using new developments like Bushfield. It's completely absent. So we have good meaning, and I welcome them. Really good, powerful statements saying walking's good, cycling's good, maybe public transport's good. That's effectively what it says, but we don't have any picture of what the transport arrangements for these new developments and in the area around these new developments will be. We do not have any attempt to outline just how many cycleways Bushfield needs, just what we expect by way of LT 120 compliant cycle routes are needed, or even whether or not we need a cycle route from Bushfield to Winchester city centre or Bushfield to Shawford. I think that's what we mean by vision, some sort of picture of what the transport arrangements will be and some sort of outline of what we hope to achieve by implementing those arrangements. Indeed, the STA goes as far as to say it's really important to have more walking and cycling, and we really wish we had the tools to be able to predict the level of walking and cycling necessary, but we didn't have the tools, so we'll leave it at that. We'll just say it might have a beneficial effect. That's effectively what the STA says. And I think in the context of what Steer have been doing in terms of predicting the emissions associated with modal change, that is particularly weak. It's a failure to come up with what the November 2024 vision-led requirement of the NPPF requires. And I've every sympathy for working in a moving environment, but I think it is an abject failure to come up with the sentence, we didn't calculate this because we haven't got the tools. If you call a plumber and they forget their spanners, they don't say, I'm going home now. They get the tools, and the tools do exist. And one really useful tool that could be available for local development is the Active Travel England Area Check user tool, for which there is a manual, and it specifies all sorts of really useful things about what an adequate network of cycleways, footways will be, and it talks about how it will integrate in the local area. And there's none of that. And I can understand that because the environment is moving rapidly. But it's really important that we don't just let this really important set of developments in national policy and in the development tools, availability of tools, escape us. And I think this local plan cannot do its job without an analysis of what a massive modal change will do. We hear all sorts of things like, well, there's a bus service improvement plan, that'll do it. It won't. The bus service improvement plan is making, in terms of, say, Bushfield, a recommendation that the number one bus between Winchester and Southampton will move from quarter hourly to every 10 minutes. That's great, but it doesn't solve Bushfield's problem. We need far more thought put into public transport serving Bushfield or any other major development. The bus service improvement plan is a very thin document based upon the existing arrangements between Hampshire County Council and the bus companies. That's not to criticise it. It was never intended, but you can't let it take the weight of what I would expect in the strategic transport.
I get the point. Thank you, Mr. Gagg.
Well, just to say, the same applies to the LCWIP. We're pretending there is a comprehensive LCWIP for Winchester, and it's not there. Yes, local. Similarly, people refer to the Winchester Movement Strategy. What is the Winchester Movement Strategy? There were a few aspirations 5 years ago, but it hasn't been developed. A lot of work's gone into it, but there have been no decisions.
Okay.
We can't pretend that those documents are in place.
Okay, you've strayed into other areas, but could I just put to the council, you've heard what Mr. Gagg said, that there isn't a vision, a picture of what transport arrangements will be. That isn't, we've spoken about how that's dealt with in the STA. Could you pick up on that point, please?
Yes, just to reiterate the aim of the STA in its transport assessment, and very much because of at the moment we're in an emerging policy landscape in terms of national policy. And
sorry, just to say that, reiterate, I'm examining this plan under the 2023 MPPF. Yeah.
Correct, and therefore to ensure that we had a sound, local plan and supportive assessments, and we did take that into considerations, and therefore we have taken the approach, again reiterating what I said before, that this is presenting a worst case. So there is a vision in the STA and some objectives of the STA, which was done in consultations with all the stakeholders, so Winchester, but also the highway authorities. Both of them have had inputs into those objectives, and it's very much what will underpin any decisions, and those will be taken forward as part of planning application. And I think a lot of the points that has been raised is to do with the details of a master plan and a development, and that's where really sustainable measures come into it, because the devil unfortunately is in the detail. Well, the STA's really its aim is to look at the strategic impact, and that's very much what has been done in line with the guidance that we had at the time.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't need any more help on the STA. If nobody has any further comment. Sorry, I should have said, I'm so sorry. If you do want to come in on a discussion, if you can just put your nameplate up, and I'll know that you wish to. I'm so sorry, I should have said that.
No, that's cool. That's
Mr.
great.
Choke, is it?
It is, yeah.
Mr. Choke, please.
I want
I
to.
was looking at you because I knew that you'd given comments on this, but
being patient,
please do come into the discussion.
We would endorse the comments Mr. Gag has just made in general terms. I think if I can build on it though, I think for clarity, there was no policy position in the 23 MPPF that prevented a vision-led approach or mandated. We are in a policy environment where it is now mandated. So the council have chosen to take that route, which is a positive step forward. But it has not been applied as a vision-led approach. A vision-led approach essentially flips the coin on the whole process. It starts with the outcome and you work backwards. That has not happened here. Essentially, what is being proposed is nothing more than a travel planning approach at the back end of the assessment process. It is a form of mitigation. The authority are putting themselves into a position where through that mitigation, they are reliant on that coming forward to make those individual allocations acceptable in planning terms. In that scenario, we do have to be aware of the spatial strategy. And again, I'll draw reference to some of the comments that I know have been made in previous matters, where we have over 50% of employment opportunities in Winchester town, where the opportunities to travel by sustainable modes within Winchester town are such that for those journeys that start and end in the town area, over 60% are already without further intervention undertaken by non-car modes. Those are statistics that we validated, but also in the STA and through the various versions of. The STA also recognises the opportunities for local trips, and particularly bus trips, are more limited in the other areas. So if we're talking about a vision for the district at a strategic level, we do have to consider where the start and the end of the journeys occur. If we continue to put the majority of development outside of the most sustainable, highest gravity or highest attraction area, there needs to be a clear strategy for how those individual allocations are to be unlocked. That does not exist. Instead, the council are referring to the Winchester Movement Strategy, which is a Winchester town area focus. There is no park and ride strategy, only to mitigate the impacts of an individual allocation to the north of the city. There is nothing in the IDP that draws reference to individual sites contributing to even simple things like the LC WIP, the WMS, etc. There is no clear plan of how those individual sites will help to deliver the mitigations needed. In that scenario, when those individual site planning applications come forward and they are forced to demonstrate how they will offset their impacts, how do they do that on themselves? There should be a clear plan and strategy to how that vision is to be unlocked. Also, just to, I know you'll pick up on it later, but policy T1, again, is clearly relevant here. It requires that location will need to demonstrate significant prominence and priority to walking, cycling and public transport. Again, if we are pushing the majority of development outside of the most sustainable location in the district, we need to have evidence and strategies and implementation plans on how that is to be secured. That is entirely absent in the strategy.
Okay, thank you. We've strayed into one of our other questions, but please pick up on the points that have been made. Can I turn to the council, please?
Well, so I accept kind of the general direction where my colleague is going there. I do think that what we've done, we've taken basically a proactive approach to basically take forward a strategic transport assessment with a very clear vision, looking at obviously the climate emergency, trying to prioritise obviously sustainable and active travel, and obviously what guidance was in place at the time. And I think that is essential because obviously my colleague Nicola Wright, who's not here, who leads the team that my colleagues are in, has been at the forefront of that vision-led approach and saying we need guidance on how this is implemented. And I think at the moment, obviously, we've got to bear in mind we are being assessed against the 2023 NPPF, which did not require a vision-led approach, but we did that in addition to take that forward because we knew we'd got obviously a climate emergency. So, and obviously the strategies and the plans that obviously our colleagues at Hampshire Statutory Arms will obviously take that forward. We've got obviously LTP4 now adopted by the county. They've got a strengthened obviously travel plan team to basically look at applications. So I'm confident that obviously we've taken it forward in terms of obviously not only the site allocations, but also obviously the other policies that we've got in this topic.
Sorry, and I'm just looking at the infrastructure delivery plan and what is in there in relation to active travel. So the first two are when we look at the district-wide infrastructure requirements are the first three junctions, aren't there? The three junctions that we spoke about, and then there's a number of active travel initiatives there, aren't there? Sorry, do you wish to comment on that?
Well, only the fact that obviously it does show how we're going to implement and what we're going to do. But obviously we've got to remember at a plan making stage, you don't have a lot of the detail about how these sites are going to be developed. A lot of the sites you don't have master plans, etc., and development. So I think it's very difficult to kind of say you've got to be prescriptive about how many cycleways and things like that because you don't have that detail. That detail comes through that design process that we have obviously kept on about in terms of how we want people to go about and to prioritise obviously active travel through the design process. So they all link together in terms of basically saying, well, policy D1 says, how do you actually think about the site in terms of basically accessibility to public transport? And that should come through the design process.
Okay. Okay, I want to move on, please. Let's move on to policy T1. As we said, we've got a suite of policies that deal with transport in the plan. The first one dealing with sustainable and active transport and travel. What that policy does, it requires planning applications for development that would increase travel to be supported by a transport assessment to quantify the amount and type of travel. And then it goes on to say that that should prioritise a number of things. And those are framed to reduce transport by private motorised forms, support active forms of travel, maintain highway safety, etc. Okay, so that's your first policy. You're suggesting a number of amendments to that policy. Are you able to introduce those, please?
Yes, I can introduce those for you. So we've got the first main modification, MM16 to policy T1, and that was from Hampshire County Council, and that was an update on where the process of the LTP4 was at the time. Obviously, significant updates since we initially wrote Reg 19 local plan. So the new text there is Hampshire County Council adopted their new local transport plan LTP4 in February 2024, which sets out its vision for future transport and travel infrastructure. So it just updates where they were at.
Okay.
Some of the other changes in M16, we've taken out, after we say the location, design and layout of the development will need to demonstrate significant prominence, and we've removed significant prominence. We've instead put priority is given to those walking, wheeling and cycling. So it's just making that clearer, adding that clarity. We've also changed criteria 2 in the policy itself. So instead of maximising opportunities to walk and cycle in compliance, we've removed in compliance and added with due regard to the Hampshire movement. Just make that's again just for clarification. And we've inserted into criteria 3, we've added and principles after concept, and that's in regard to 20-minute neighbourhoods. And that's consistent with the RTPI's definition of 20-minute neighbourhoods.
Right. Okay. So that
there are a couple of others.
There are other ones.
Yeah, just to criteria 5. After walking, wheeling, and cycling and buses, we've put as appropriate the rail network as well at every stage of development, just to include that one as well. And to criteria 6, we've added as appropriate again the rail network to that one.
Okay. And I understand where they have evolved from.
Yes.
And those across the table can comment on those if need be. Now, there were two other matters that we need to touch on in relation to this policy. I'll come back to the park and ride point. The first one is in relation to the principles of a 20-minute neighbourhood. Now that applies the principles in a way, and what you say is that the way in which that has applied, I'm sorry, I've jumped around a bit. I've gone into T1 and now I'm back at a strategic level, and I apologise for that. But I asked a question about 20-minute neighbourhoods, and the question here: how has the concept and principles of 20-minute neighbourhoods informed spatial strategy? And of course, the concept of 20-minute neighbourhoods is in policy in T1, and you introduce the concept in the supporting text. So what you say to me is that you've applied the principles in a way proportionate and appropriate. And I mean, this has been rehearsed throughout the examination through SP2, spatial strategy, T1 to T4. You've got mixed use development, co-location of housing and employment, etc. Now, I don't want to rehearse the whole argument about the spatial strategy. Blor, I understand your perspective, and what you say is basically the spatial strategy delivers a disproportionate level of development in MTRAs and SHUAs, I'm sorry for all the acronyms, with limited active and public transport options, and there's not enough in the Winchester town area, which you say it is the most sustainable settlement, and where those options are available. So I completely understand the nub of your concern. I don't want to rehearse all of that because we heard lots about that in previous sessions, didn't we? But is there anything that you want to say, if you keep your comments to the concept and principles of a 20-minute neighbourhood, please, and how that has informed the spatial strategy, please?
No, absolutely. I think the concept is generally well understood and discussed. It is a good starting measure for understanding the spatial strategy options and constraints. I think the issue that we have is that the council have themselves in some ways acknowledged the sustainability and application of 20-minute cities or neighbourhoods themselves in paragraph 610 of the local plan. And essentially, they're saying we'll make 20-minute neighbourhoods a policy requirement for all sites within the Winchester town area, but outside of that area, it's best endeavours. Essentially, that is an implicit acknowledgement that is covered in the STA of the limitations of delivering sustainable development at the source of the trip. Turning that to policy, the policy is therefore unclear in terms of application. You can't take such a, and particularly under the claimed position of a vision-led strategy, that is not a vision-led strategy. And I think that is a self-limiting factor, which naturally works against the policy T1, because if you're naturally excluding that criteria, how can it demonstrate significant prominence?
Okay, the council do acknowledge that, don't they? Because they say that in some areas, indeed, you know, we hear from national policy that one has to have regard to the limitations of public transport in rural areas.
Absolutely, there has to be balanced growth across the district to support the different needs of different communities. Absolutely, and again, I know you fully understand our case, but it's a matter of how that is distributed fairly. Obviously, there is also a case here about more growth towards the south if the authority are meeting unmet needs, but again, that's a question at this stage. But if we are mandating that, it is unclear how far you extend that policy in those areas. That will have consequences to the transport strategy for Winchester Town area. Your colleague Sheila Holden did a webinar just a few days ago that made the point that sustainable locations are not just about making that location itself sustainable. It will have consequences at the end of the journey. Again, the Winchester Town area is the destination for over 50% of all journeys. There has to be a more holistic, vision-led approach to do that, and 20 minutes has to be the starting point.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gagg, please.
Thank you, Mel. There was just one general point about T1 that I'd like to pick up, if that's appropriate. Mr. Fox referred to the design process. It's all in the design process. And I think there is a parallel between how we treat building standards and how we treat sustainable transport standards. And we had a very interesting and I feel productive discussion about how building standards should be within the local plan. And I think we do need the equivalent for transport standards, as I've perhaps bored you with the idea that transport produces twice the amount of emissions than buildings. And yet we are talking in very specific terms about building standards. And I think we do need standards for design somewhere in this plan. And some active travel guidance does exist from Active Travel England and in other places, but there does feel to be a dangerous lack of any reference to design standards. So it's all right inviting people to design something, but they've got to know what they're designing to and why they're designing it. And I feel there isn't enough in this plan to help them.
Okay, now that's the general point. If we deal with the two points separately, could I just go back to the council? You've heard what Blore have said. I'm sorry, refer to you as Blore, but do you wish to comment on that at all? I've heard what you've what you both said?
Yeah, I think we'd like to make a comment.
Yes, absolutely.
When Blorholm's mentioned about paragraph 610,
Yeah.
I think we could include a potential modification to that in order to make it clearer that Winchester Town isn't the only place within our district that 20-minute neighbourhoods could be achieved. We have a lot of other districts, you know, we've got Whiteley, West of Waterlooville, there's quite a few market towns and rural areas where walkability to schools, shops, and we've got public transport network that could be achieved there. So we can come up with some proposed wording for that and include that within that supporting text.
Okay. I understand that. Mr. Choke? Don't worry.
I think we wouldn't be adverse to that, but I think there is still a lack of evidence.
No, I understand
within
I understand your position.
I was just
Yeah.
going to relate it to the settlement hierarchy.
Yeah, yes.
That if that is going to happen, I think that there does need to be an evaluation of defining clearly what the 20-minute neighbourhood comprises to assess those settlements in light of that. That hasn't been undertaken, and to be evidence-led. Again, just more generally and going back, I don't agree with statements that have been made about the significance that master plans play in overall strategies. They are significant within the red line, but from a strategic point of view, it is the connections from and between the origin and the destination, again, that the authority can control and can start to plan for positively. There is a way of evidencing vision-led strategies beyond the Active Travel England approach, a more modelling, mathematical-based approach. Again, there is just a general narrative within the local plan of we said the right things, there's not enough tools out there, so it's best wishes and hopes essentially. But where we're making strategic decisions that last 15 years and have to give confidence to developers to invest in those planning applications and improve certainty, where that lack of evidence at this stage now could potentially change their understanding at planning application stage, because those answers and solutions aren't defined and understood. There is a significant issue on effectiveness and delivery on an individual site basis, and then against those objectives.
Okay. Does the council have any comments on that?
Yes, just without the risk of repeating what we've already said in stage 1, I think that's mostly covered under SP2 and how we've come to the spatial strategy and how the settlement hierarchy informed our site selection process. You know, we've got the 20-minute neighbourhoods has been weaved into the SHELAR, it's been weaved into the settlement hierarchy. I don't think we need to repeat what we've already stated about that.
Okay. I understand. I've read what you have said. I've also listened to a number of people who have represented Blorholm. So thank you very much for that. Okay, let's move on. I just had one other question about the park and ride and how that how does the strategic transport assessment, including its findings in relation to park and ride and infrastructure, inform the plan? But it's probably the colleagues at the end of the table there who are going to speak to that.
Yes, so obviously this has been rather than a linear process,
Yeah.
Where you know the STAs, it's been a kind of circular process really, where the local plan, the STA has informed the local plan, but the local plan itself has also informed what we assess clearly, and very much in terms of the park and ride infrastructure, a great deal of work had already been done for the Winchester movement strategy. Which we took on, if you like, well, we took the outcomes of it, and the WMS had identified 10 schemes, so not just aspirations, that to be taken forward, of which were park and ride sites, and it did identify the need in the northern part of Winchester rather than the southern part. My understanding, straying slightly away from you know, our role as STA author, is that there is capacity in the southern park and ride sites at present, and the constraint is really on the bus services linking the park and ride sites to the town centre.
Okay, so there's park and ride. We heard, what is it? Can't remember. W2. We heard about park and ride, etc., and that's related to the St John Moores site. Why wasn't that included in the do something scenario?
No, so the park and ride at Sir John Moore Barracks is included as part of the actual minimum, because it is part of the policy allocation, and it came as a, well, I wouldn't say committed obviously improvement scheme, but because it came really as well alongside the Winchester movement strategy, that I had already looked, if you like, specifically at the need for that site.
So it's in the do minimum.
So it's in the do minimum,
Okay,
yes.
but
So
not in the do something.
in the do something, there's obviously it's included in
Yeah.
the do something, but the that's right, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, I'm
Yes. So it's in both, yes and no.
Yeah.
But it's not been included as a mitigation, if you like, because it's been taken as part of the site allocation.
Okay, I don't have any further questions on that from my research for this session. That was the only query I had. Mr. Choke, I saw your nameplate go up.
Thank you. Just a quick one, really. The park and ride strategy forms a huge opportunity for a genuine vision-led strategy. Again, going back to the point of recognising the need to deliver a start to end of journey solution. Under the spatial strategy at the moment, given the quantum of development beyond the Winchester town area, that does need to be thought through. The WMS, which was produced pre-pandemic, does talk about capacity issues in the southern part of the city. It also recognises that it's the part of the city that has the most significant issues in terms of bus journey times and bus journey time reliability. There is therefore an opportunity through a genuine vision-led approach to deliver, even if capacity is no longer a problem. And I would note it's not been modelled since the pandemic, so we don't know the rebound possibilities and where we'll end up at the end of the local plan with the growth that's predicted. But if that is going to be part of a vision-led response, there is at least an opportunity to deliver improved bus priority measures, particularly along Badger Farm Road. All of those sorts of issues where there could be a pooled contribution approach are absent from the IDP.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Gagg.
While park and rides clearly have a good impact on congestion within central Winchester, their impact on the emissions created by transport is highly questionable, even negative. Good park and ride in North Winchester, for example, could bring about a mode shift towards more car use rather than less car use. And so I would suggest that it's not really the sort of answer that...
Can you just explain that point, please?
Yes. Well, creating a park and ride north of Winchester, for example, could actually make it much more attractive to drive from places like Andover to Winchester than catch the bus, because then you've got a very easy place to park your car and then you get the park and ride bus. That could produce, and there are studies that show it in certain circumstances, it will produce an increase in car use north of Winchester. So that will actually, given the current mix of fuels that cars use, an increase in emissions rather than a decrease in emissions. And if the money spent on building a car park and ride north of Winchester were spent on increasing the frequency of the bus services, that could genuinely reduce the emissions.
And what you've just said to me, is that evidenced anywhere?
There are studies which I can send you, but
Okay.
there are too many variables for tight evidence. But it has been suggested that if you're going to build park and rides, it makes more sense to build them in satellite towns like Alresford and Sutton Scotney, so that then the buses that serve the park and ride can also be used to serve the district.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Could I have a response to the points that have been made? Can you take them together, please?
Yeah. In terms of the comments Mr. Gagg just made.
Mr. Gagg's comment,
Yeah.
yes.
So in terms of the STA, the park and ride on the north side at Sir John Moore Barracks was modelled, and he's right in the fact that it does create some additional trips coming in off the strategic road network to the site, but it does reduce the number of trips heading into the city centre. So on that respect, it's a balanced kind of exchange there in terms of number of trips.
And the overall balance?
I haven't got that figure, but I can definitely find that.
But where does it go? The overall balance?
Oh, from the bus trips into the town
Yes.
centre. So, parking and then, those heading into town. So overall, it's reduced the number that would have once been
Okay.
going into town. And the other point, just to make there, is around vehicle fleet. So for the future, many towns and cities have moved their bus fleet over to electric or hydrogen power. So that's another option to mention.
Okay, and the point that Mr. Choke has made, please, can you pick those up?
Sorry, probably, could you just summarise it quickly again? I don't think we had any comment on, to be fair, so it's probably not worth.
Okay,
If you're happy.
Yes,
please do.
It was just the point that under a vision-led approach, as you've suggested that you're taking, park and ride has to be one of those measures to be considered. It is absent again. We need to look at make the point first of all. The WMS does talk about capacity problems in the south of the city. It talks about bus journey times and reliability being a problem in the south of the city. That study was pre-pandemic, so whilst Hampshire are currently saying there is capacity in the south of the city, there hasn't been an updated study to address when that might come back. And we know the authority's position on traffic generally is there will be rebound, so we should be assuming the same for park and ride at some point. The point I was making in together with that is, given the spatial strategy where we are drawing traffic from further afield to Winchester town area because of the density of opportunity there, we have to look at making that mode of travel even more attractive. Even if capacity isn't required, bus priority measures are, and there's an opportunity to identify those measures, plan for them, and put them in the IDP, for example.
So just to pick up, so in terms of the locations and the need for various park and ride sites, obviously that is a separate policy, but also it's been embedded by the work that has been done for the Winchester movement strategy, which there's a vision for the park and ride, and it did not identify the need for further sites in the southern part of Winchester. And as I mentioned to you before, yes, that work was done pre-pandemic, but there's actually been reviews of bus patronage and usage of the current facilities since post-pandemic, and then we have gone back to similar levels of usage. One of the main constraints I understand from the park and ride to the south at the moment is not the capacity of the site themselves, but it is, as you said, access by public transport on the routes. And again, a lot of technical work has been done to identify opportunities to improve those. Unfortunately, the buses are mostly on road, and there's very limited opportunities to kind of create a bus only corridor, and therefore that is why it's so. I think you should look at the park and ride sites as not a singular measure. It's not either or. It's part of an overall movement approach, and I would make that point again when you look at yes, the second part of the journey, so either the origin or the destination, either in and out of Winchester, because there's actually a balanced commuter traffic in as well as out, and the need for the park and ride, yes, it will attract some car-based trips, but actually most of those car-based trips are already being made. They just then go into town, and the purpose of the park and ride is just to prevent them from driving into the town. So,
and you referred to a number of reviews. Have those been published?
no, I think it's part of the BSIP, for instance. They have looked at patronage because obviously it's commercial as much as anything else. So
The
yeah,
bus infrastructure plan.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Choke, just quickly, if you want.
Just one very much
Yes,
point
of
there.
course.
I think that the key point in what was said there is that if you adopt that approach, there is no mechanism for delivery or funding. In order to deal with those issues at the moment, it has to be delivered through strategic level growth.
Do you wish to comment on that point made? Just quickly.
Yes, I mean the delivery obviously always will come through developer contributions.
Yeah.
So it will be reviewed on a side-by-side basis.
Okay, I understand that. Okay. Let's move on, please. I want to move on to policy T2. We'll leave T1 there. I don't mind if anybody is not going to be involved in other policies. I'm happy for them to leave. Sorry, I was looking at you, Mr. If you wanted to. Now, policy T2 introduces that policy sets parking requirements for new development. The nub of this is that it doesn't rely on parking standards. So what it does is rather parking for private cars is dictated through the design process, prioritising sustainable forms of transport, and then it sets out a number of criteria against which development will be assessed, and that's tailored to local circumstances. So first of all, so we understand the policy. Is it providing appropriate level of clarity and certainty for developers and decision takers? That's the nub of the concern. Would it frustrate development coming forward?
Yes, ma'am. I think a number of the main modifications in MM17 have allowed for more clarification. I think especially between policy T2 and T3, I think it sets out that the parking for new developments is completely focused upon in T2. So we've made a number of criteria moves from T3 to T2. Anything related to parking, we've moved to T2. I can go through those modifications with you if you like.
Okay, so yes, so what that does is that what you've recognised in the MMs that you've put forward is that the policies were confusing, the suite of policies were confusing. So now what we have is T2 deals just with parking in new developments.
Yes, that's
Sorry,
correct.
I need to refer to my notes here.
Yes, there was a considerable amount of overlap, which we saw during the MIQs. And in that case, we've changed policy T3's title, but we'll come on to that one.
Okay, and T3 prioritises sustainable transport through design and layout, and then T4
is all around access.
Is all about access and requires safe and traffic routes. It's access, but also about safe and attractive routes to and within development, isn't it?
Yes,
So
that's
how the policies are divided up. But my question is a little. So I understand that, and no doubt that has improved clarity. But my point really is you don't have parking standards, and you say that will come through the design process. And what I'm saying is, does that provide the necessary clarity for development coming forward? Is that clear to decision makers and to the development industry how they should respond in terms of parking provision?
Yes, I can answer that, ma'am. I think in terms of that, I think it's important to say that we were part of a pilot project with Active Travel England.
Okay.
We're one of a handful of local authorities that worked alongside them, and they provided us with a detailed review of our Reg 18 policies, and they fully support all of our policies within the active travel and transport section. We made a number of changes that they say that includes stronger wording and emphasises that. In terms of not having parking standards, they were in support of that. And I think, again, it comes back to the design process, and each site will be different case by case process in terms of their site specific needs. What we felt was it was important, as the whole plan has been looked at through a climate lens, sort of the emergency that we declared in 2019, it was important that development where we could have car-free development didn't need to justify why they weren't including car parking within that. But we think it's clear enough for developers to be able to justify through the design process why they've included the parking that they have. But we want them to prioritise active travel first and not be car led.
Okay, how does that work in more rural areas?
I think what we do is we recognise that obviously we're a large district, includes obviously a large rural area, and obviously in those situations it might not be appropriate to basically really prioritise obviously the walking cycling, because it might not be practical in terms of their kind of where they are. So I think that's where it comes down to what my colleague was saying about basically on a case by case basis to say, well, where is the site? And you start with where is the site? What are the opportunities for obviously public transport, cycling, walking? How frequent is that? Can that be improved? And you're going through that journey, that step process of justifying through the design process that you've thought about the site, you've thought about the location, and you've thought about what infrastructure is there and what infrastructure could be improved. And that's what we want developers to document.
Okay, I understand that. So let's take that. So what you do is you divide it up. You've got residential developments and then you've got other, haven't you? So, okay, you go through all of that process and residential development, for example, and at the end of that process, it falls out that you do require some on-site parking.
Yep.
What indicates what level that should be set at?
Yeah, well, that's through our obviously collaborative work that we would do, obviously with the developers through the pre-app process, through obviously Hampshire, obviously their statutory arm, looking at that site and obviously justifying what it is. Because I think if we didn't do that, we did the traditional approach, obviously it's 2 car parking spaces per house, we could end up with the wrong result. We basically need to think about where that site is and what is suitable for that site.
So what would you be looking to for? What would a decision maker? What would they refer to in order? You've been through the design process. It says that yes, you need some residual element of on-site car parking. What would it take?
Well, I think
level of car parking you need to avoid all the all the concerns if you don't have car parking, you know, in terms of highway safety, on-street capacity, all of that stuff.
I think if you can prove that obviously the site, basically you can't perhaps enhance the bus network, you can't do obviously walking and cycling links or whatever, it's just not practical, and then you could come forward and say, well, okay, we'll revert back to obviously so many spaces per house. But I think you've got to have gone through that process to justify that.
completely get that, but when you revert back, what do you revert back to?
Well, I think that this comes down from our dialogue with our colleagues at Hampshire Highways, and obviously what LTP4 says, and the whole step change that we need to make. Otherwise, we are starting off on the wrong foot. We're very clear about that.
Okay, so what does that mean for a developer coming forward? You know, when they're doing their initial site appraisals, etc., and you normally, you know, put into the mix X number of car parking spaces because you've got certainty about what those are. What does it mean for that process?
Well, obviously, a developer will obviously try and ultimately, obviously, people like cars, don't they? Let's be truthful. They like the reassurance. Obviously, there's a car parking space of that development, and obviously that's probably where they'll start from. But obviously, you know, ultimately that's what will happen. But we're saying basically have a look at that and just basically demonstrate through that process that you thought about it. And you may well end up with a situation of 2 car parking spaces per house, and that's fine. But as long as you've documented it and you've gone through that process and you've justified it.
Okay.
Like I say, Active Travel England were very supportive of this approach, because otherwise, like I say, we are just planning for the car, which we don't want to do.
Okay. I've heard what you've said, and so in terms of how it would work in a rural area, in terms of effectiveness, what you're saying to me is it would work in the same way.
That's correct. It would just work in the same way, but you'd probably end up with a different solution in the rural area for those very reasons that obviously, you know, it's just not possible or you can't do as much as you can. But at least then it's in the thought process, and that's what we're trying to get across as part of the design process, that it is at least thought about rather than basically just default position of two car parking spaces per house.
I understand. Tell me, in paragraph 6.30, you refer to the concept of transport hubs and last mile delivery. Can you just explain that to me, please? Just what I'm not familiar with that concept.
That's defined within LTP4, but essentially it's on the outskirts of, say, Winchester town.
Yeah.
In so that the last mile of the delivery within the actual Winchester town itself is electric, or is bicycles, electric vans, to bring that from the transport hub on the outside, essentially, of the Winchester town area. So it arrives at the last.
Okay. Have you got any of these?
I think they were trialling it in Winnell actually, which is a good example where obviously it's off the M3 motorway, and obviously you can do it. Other cities have got it, so for example Brighton and things like that. So it's not a totally new concept. It's something that we would be supportive of, because ultimately it reduces obviously those large white vans, to be truthful, going into the city centre, and obviously consolidates things. But like I say, we're not being prescriptive. We just say basically we are encouraging that kind of idea.
Supportive. No, I understand. No, it's just a query about the concept. Okay, so you do, you know, and we've spoken about, you provide guidance for residential development. Okay, and that's in criteria 3, isn't it? And it's in the supporting text. What about other development? Because you don't really provide anything for other development.
That's, again, it's on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
It depends if it's mixed use, it depends. And again, I think it's just a case of them justifying it within the design process, pre-app consultations, and looking at what LTP4 says as well. So again, it's case by case, specific location, type, use.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I've got that residual concern about, you know, when a developer comes forward, you know, what the reference point is when you go through that process, and what you know, everything dealt with on a case by case basis, and what that means in terms of effectiveness.
I'm not so concerned as you, but I would be, because I'm an officer. Yeah. But I think obviously if this developed into an issue, we can easily produce obviously a technical advice note to do that step process, to explain more clarification about what we actually need. But I think I'd prefer to do that through a technical advice note, and we may well need a technical advice note that elaborates more on the design process, that kind of gives that certainty and assurance. But I think we can address that if it becomes basically in our minds that obviously that they are struggling with that, we can provide extra advice.
And would that provide any sort of baseline standard?
I think it's obviously it could include a baseline standard. I'm still nervous about basically doing that because I don't want that to be the default system, but obviously it could include that. But I think it's better sitting outside the plan as a technical advice note that can be changed, adapted, obviously, if we realise there is a problem with this. But like I say, as my colleague said, these policies were kind of vetted by Active Travel England. They were very supportive of it. We haven't got any objection from obviously Hampshire in the statutory arm in terms of obviously the wording of those policies.
Okay. And Hampshire County Council comments, when they commented on the plan, they said you should look to adopting standards in the future.
But I think we've clarified it the other day. It was at the Reg 18 stage.
And that wasn't ever pursued?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. I understand that. Okay. And it comes back to the process, assessing car parking demand, assessing impact on, parking stress in the local area.
That's correct. That's all comes into the mix. It's all those factors that we want developers to think about.
And have you got enough guidance? Is enough guidance to?
I'm fairly comfortable that obviously that they can do this. Like I say, I don't think this is an issue in terms of basic. And in fact, obviously, it can actually drive up densities of sites because obviously we're saying you don't need so much parking and prioritising obviously accessibility. You can actually get more on the site. So. Obviously, from a developer's perspective, this is actually better for them in one respect because obviously they can get more on the site.
Okay, I'll leave that discussion now. I've actually incorporated all my queries. I'll turn to the council. Is there anything else that you would like to say on T2? No. Could I turn to the other side of the table, please, Mr. Gagg?
Just to reiterate and follow up on your comments, I don't see the design process without standards being a very comfortable thing to do. And I just think that without standards, it takes the whole discussion about whether adequate provision is being made away from the public realm into a rather private conversation. And I do hope that guidance or amendments to this plan do include some standards. Perhaps I'm breaking the rules, but the reference, for example, to nearest bus route, I think that should really be subject to a design process, a discussion of specific circumstances, and rather more in the way of standards about whether, suppose the nearest bus route only runs once a week, that's clearly no good if there's a bus route 5 minutes walk away that runs every 5 minutes. So I think it needs more. There needs to be more meat on this if it's really going to work.
I understand your perspective. Mr. Joke?
Yeah, thank you. You appreciate we didn't make comments on this particular area, but just from hearing the discussion today, point of clarification really, are the council suggesting that in order to determine the parking level, that applicants will need to go through a vision-led process in order to determine and exploit all of the opportunities and constraints? Because obviously that's not written into other policies as a requirement. It's just merely reference to a standard TA process.
I think it's dealt with in D1. Basically, obviously, that's the design process policy, the strategic policy that basically you need to obviously go through that thought process. So I think it's covered in D1.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to leave that policy there. You've heard what I've said, and you've heard what other people around the table have said. Okay, let's move on to T3. And I think a lot of the discussion regarding these policies you've addressed in your main mods, and in particular in So what you've done is you've divided it out, as we said. T2 is dealing with parking on site. T3 is dealing with prioritising sustainable transport through design and layout. And then T4 is dealing with access to and throughout the site in a safe and attractive route. So let's deal with T3 first of all. Would you like to, please, anyone from the council, to introduce the way in which you've divided up those policies, so that that'll frame our discussion. We can hopefully shortcut it. Sorry, is everybody comfortable to still sit? Because I don't intend to take that much time on these policies, and then we can take a short break. Please, the council, please.
Yes, of course, ma'am. So essentially, policy T3 now just reinforces the council's commitment to embedding sustainable and active travel at the heart of the development design through the design process, and that applies to all new development except householder, and it requires applicants to demonstrate throughout the design process how they have prioritised active and sustainable modes of transport. So it shifts away from the focus, obviously, of accommodating the car as the default to prioritising active e-mobility and car clubs, all modes that align with the council's wider transport, climate and health objectives. So essentially, it sort of helps the developers know what to start with, where to start in the design process, what they need to be including. It also responds positively within the context to the high quality Places SPD or its successor. And it recognises the importance of well-designed signage and lighting as well, so safe paths to and from the new development, and that it's appropriate to their location as well.
Okay, so let's deal. Thank you for that. So let's deal with criteria T31. These criteria, that what the policy says is in order to provide sustainable and active modes of travel, planning application, effectively the trigger is every application excluding householder applications, isn't it? So new development. So some of these criteria, let's look at T31. Is that reasonable that all applications minus householder should be providing priority is given for active and e-mobility travel and car clubs? Would it?
Yeah, we think that would be appropriate,
Okay.
such as an extension to a house. We don't think would trigger that policy being required.
Okay, no, it's rather the it's rather the baseline limit I was getting at. Of course, householder applications, not anything above a householder application would need to give priority given to active and e-mobility travel and car clubs. I don't mind who answers.
Yeah.
But for example, should that relate to applications that increase travel or something like that?
I get where you're coming from, Mark, in terms of basically, obviously, that it's obviously that threshold, isn't it, about what actually triggers that.
Trigger?
And obviously, obviously, just thinking of what there. Obviously, if you're obviously thinking about a threshold, it's obviously what that threshold could be, and that's where I'm slightly nervous in terms of saying what is it that threshold could be, that you could give that clarification in the policy. Clearly, obviously, an application would have to go through that process, and obviously, if it's not appropriate, they can obviously say that this criteria is not appropriate.
But it is in policy, isn't it?
It is. Yes.
That's the difficulty. It is in policy, and somebody, you know, has to justify why they're not able to meet that policy. That's the difficulty for applicants, isn't it?
I think the only way you could probably do with it is you could perhaps include the word unless, obviously, you demonstrate that this is not applicable for the application, etc. But he's trying to think of that wording to kind
To include a bit of flexibility.
bit of flexibility in
Yeah.
that criteria
Okay.
potentially could be done via main modification. Mark, is that
Okay.
appropriate?
And you'll look at that.
We can
Yeah,
look at that.
okay,
Idea. Thank you.
Okay. And then can we just in respect of that, in your statement, you refer to the building regulations and say that it's referred to in the policy. Could you just direct me to that, where it's referred to in the policy?
Sorry, Mark, can you help us out where you're looking?
Sorry, in your statement.
Oh, in a statement. Yeah.
Sorry, in your statement, you referred to the building regulations, and it's just you say that it's reflected in the policy. And I just, can you give me, can you just point me to that, please? Oh, it's 2. It's 2. T32. Conveniently located in accordance with the building regulations. Thank you for that.
That's obviously being recommended to be deleted, isn't it? Part of main mods.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just turning to that.
Yeah, so that's
Yes,
the one we
it
moved to
is.
T2.
Yes,
Yeah.
it did. And when it's moved to T2, yes, that reference is deleted, isn't it? I'm just going through that. Parking is provided on site. It will have facilities for charging. So it's not actually, is it? Can I ask you to look at that? Because
I think my only point is obviously whether or not you need to actually repeat it in the building regs, because the building regs actually set out. So I think it's a bit of purpose. I think
Yeah.
that was probably the reason we didn't actually put it in there. Our memory's a bit gone on that, but I think that's probably the case, that we re-looked at it and said, well, actually, if it's covered in building regs,
Just repeat it.
we just don't need to repeat it.
yeah, I take that point. I take that point. Okay. Is there anything that anybody over the table would like to say? Mr. Gang, you've got your nameplate up. Don't worry. I know it has. I know it has, and I do understand the point. The point that you're making, that that there needs to be something to measure these good intentions with. Yeah, I have got the point. Thank you, Mr. Gag. Okay, and could we turn to policy T4? And as we've said, when we were introducing them, this requires safe and attractive routes to and within the development. Now, I think that's clear now through the main mods that you've suggested. Could you introduce those main mods, just so that
Yes, of course, ma'am.
it's fully clear what the division between those 3 policies is and what
Yes.
you're putting in here, please?
Absolutely. So to improve the clarity of policy T4 from T2 and T3, this is primarily for access for new developments. So we've included a new criteria 5.
Yeah.
So design incorporates parking provision, which is drop-off spaces, vehicular access, curbside space for servicing and loading where appropriate.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to the last criteria that was already included. We have, however, changed that criteria, now criteria 6, which we've taken out in reasonable proximity. Yes, we've so it just reads as any sites that are likely to generate large numbers of HGV movements need to be accessible to major road networks or the strategic road network. We think that improves the clarity of that policy.
Yeah, I've got that. I don't have any further questions. Having done my preparation, I don't have any further questions on that. Does anybody else, please? Okay, it's now 25 to 12. Let's have a break till 12 o'clock and then we'll pick up on monitoring. I just have 3 questions, I think, on monitoring, or 2. So that won't be a long session, and then we'll have the just as part of that, we'll have the final summary.
Just to give you the heads up, Mum, I've been invited by council just in the closing remarks just to make a few final points. It won't take more than 5 minutes, I don't suppose.
That's absolutely fine. So if we come back at 12 o'clock, can I thank the participants for your attendance today and for your contributions? Is it particularly Mr. Gag, who has been here for many sessions, but thank you very much for your time, and your contributions have been very helpful. Thank you. Okay, it's now 25 to 12. Let's come back again at 12 o'clock and we'll deal with monitoring. Thank you.